There are moments when life looks perfect. The right house, the right smile, the right morning light. But sometimes perfection is just a disguise. Tonight's story is about a woman who believed she had everything until the truth reminded her that happiness built on illusion is only borrowed time. This is The Illusion of Happiness, a story of love, betrayal, and the quiet courage to begin again. You're listening to Calm Mind Journal. There are mornings that feel like they were painted by a kind memory. The house was bathed in golden light, soft and deliberate, the kind that made everything look safe. The kitchen counter with the half-cut orange, the newspaper folded next to a steaming mug of coffee, the faint laughter of a 9-year-old boy echoing down the hall. Elizabeth smiled as she buttered toast, her silk robe brushing against the counter. Her husband, Ryan, sat opposite her, scrolling through emails, wearing that same quiet confidence that had once made her fall in love. Their son, Noah, munched on cereal, humming to the rhythm of a cartoon theme. It was, by all appearances, the picture of happiness. And yet, sometimes, happiness is nothing more than a reflection, beautiful from a distance, fragile up close. Ryan looked up from his phone. "You're thinking too much again," he said, smiling. She laughed lightly, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "You always say that." Because it's always true. He reached across the table, touching her wrist gently. Elizabeth loved that the way he still reached for her. She didn't see, couldn't see, the weight behind that touch, the hesitation that lasted a second too long. At 35, Elizabeth Morgan was the kind of woman people admired quietly. A senior physician at St. James Hospital in Seattle, she had the kind of presence that made people trust her, calm, composed. People often said, "She has everything a perfect husband, a stable career, a beautiful son, but even perfection has seams." That evening, as she folded Ryan's jacket into the closet, something small slipped from the inner pocket, a lipstick, red as sin, capped in gold. Not hers. Her hand froze mid-air. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. The silence around her became too loud. She looked at it, turning it in her fingers. The brand unfamiliar. A part of her mind whispered logic. It could be a patience. It could be nothing. But her heart, her instinct already knew. When Ryan returned home later that night, she greeted him with the same soft voice, the same calm smile. "Long day." He nodded, tired. She leaned in and kissed his cheek. the scent of his cologne mixed with something floral not hers. He didn't notice her pause. He never did. At the hospital, the next morning, whispers floated like dust in sunlight. In the cafeteria, 2 nurses leaned close, voices low. Did you hear about the new VP at Lennox Hotels? The one who's been seen with his secretary, the young one, Olivia? Something? Yeah, she's stunning. Poor wife, though. They say she's a doctor, doesn't even know. Elizabeth walked past them, her tray trembling slightly in her hands. She didn't know they were talking about her husband. Not yet. But intuition is cruel. It always arrives before proof does. That evening, she found herself standing by the kitchen window, staring at nothing. The city glowed in distant lights. Ryan's laughter drifted from Noah's room, that deep, charming laugh that could make anyone believe in him. For a brief second, she wanted to believe too, that nothing was wrong, that the lipstick meant nothing, that the world was still whole. But when he came into the kitchen and wrapped his arms around her from behind, she froze. His embrace was perfect warm, practiced, but his eyes, reflected faintly in the glass, were empty. She smiled through the reflection. You smell like rain, she said. He chuckled. You and your metaphors. Outside, it had started to drizzle. Inside, something inside her, something small and sacred, had begun to dissolve. In another building across town, on the 12th floor of the Lennox Hotel headquarters, Olivia Carter leaned against the glass wall of her office, 26, beautiful, ambitious, the kind of woman who had learned early that power was a language, and she spoke it fluently. From her angle, she could see Ryan in the conference room, adjusting his tie, confident as ever. She smiled, not the innocent kind, but the kind that knows exactly what it wants. Her father, the chairman, had plans for Ryan, and so did she. That night, Elizabeth sat in the dim light of her bedroom. No music, no noise, just the hum of the city outside and the faint echo of laughter from another time. She opened her journal, a habit she had long abandoned, and wrote one line. Every tragedy begins when someone truly believes they are happy. Then she closed it, and for the first time in years, she didn't pray before she slept. Temptation rarely kicks down the door. It sends a calendar invite. Olivia began with competence and timing. She was always where Ryan needed her to be outside a meeting with the right printouts, inside a crisis with the right answer, beside him after a late presentation with a bottle of Barolo and a glass already poured. She had the gift of listening as if she weren't collecting. and the gift of smiling as if she weren't negotiating. "You carry too much alone," she said one night, when the city outside was glittering and indifferent. He laughed softly. "That's what the job is." "No," she said, pouring wine. "That's what men tell themselves when they're starved for kindness. Kindness is a shapeshifter. On tired days, it can look like a hand on your back. On lonely days, it can look like destiny." The first time happened in a hotel suite the company kept for executives who worked past midnight. Ryan told himself it was the wine, the relief after a deal, the exhaustion. He told himself he didn't plan it, and therefore it was less of a decision. He was gentle with her, and afterward he tried to be gentle with himself, too. He washed his hands longer than he needed to, stood at the window, and watched the storm roll over Elliott Bay like absolution that had decided to arrive as weather. When he came home before dawn, Elizabeth was asleep on the sofa, a medical journal open across her chest. He covered her with a blanket and stood there long enough to feel unfamiliar to himself. He promised silently to end it, promises made to a mirror break at the first reflection. It didn't end. It organized itself. Mondays were meetings and restraint. Thursdays were late dinners and a door that locked. Weekends he was domestic and careful, doing puzzles with Noah, carrying groceries, folding laundry with a devotion that was, in some wounded part of him, sincere. He loved his son. He loved what Elizabeth brought into a room. And yet he loved, too, the version of himself that Olivia reflected back, hungrier, younger, necessary. Olivia learned his tells the way he rubbed his temple when he wanted to say no and couldn't, the way he checked his phone then decided not to answer, the way he said this stays professional like a man who knew the river and insisted he was only looking at it. Her father, Charles Carter, had begun to notice Ryan as well. "The boy has spine," he told Olivia at a charity dinner. "Spine and polish. We need both." "Then give him room to grow," she said lightly, swirling champagne. Charles glanced at her, reading the subtext the way men like him read stock tickers. "Room," he said. "He'll need allies." A month later, on a night heavy with rain, Charles asked Ryan to join him in his office after a board review. The room smelled of old leather and newer money. "You've carried Lennox through a difficult quarter," Charles said, steepling his fingers. "I reward competence." Ryan shifted in his chair. Compliments from men like Charles were never free. "I am expanding the hotel portfolio," Charles continued. "The West Coast string. The big one. I want someone young enough to be hungry and old enough to be careful." He paused. "This could be you." Ryan felt his chest lift. "I'm honored. Good," Charles said, "My daughter will support the transition." He let the sentence sit. "A family that builds together lasts." The subtext wasn't even sub. It was text. Ryan swallowed. "I'm married," he said, choosing courage for a full second. "So was I." Twice. Charles replied, not unkindly, "Marriage is a contract. So is this company." He sealed, "In a decade. You'll thank me for simplifying your life." Ryan left the office in a fog that smelled like compromise. He drove without music. He parked a block away from home and sat in the dark, watching his breath draw ghosts on the windshield. When he walked inside, Elizabeth was at the dining table helping Noah with a science project. She looked up and smiled, an old, simple smile that had gotten them through so many thinner years. For a moment, he saw the man who had begged her to move across the country for his career, the man who had driven her to night shifts with coffee and hope. He saw the innocent version of himself that he had set down somewhere and forgot to pick up. Daddy. Noah called. "Do you think a volcano can be blue?" "Anything can be blue if you change the light," Ryan said, and his voice startled him with its softness. That night, he told Olivia they had to stop. She listened like a banker reading a poor man's plan. "If that's what you want," she said, and kissed his cheek the way one signs paperwork cleanly. They did not stop. The more he fought, the more gravity did its patient work. It was Margaret, his mother, who recognized the pattern. She had smelled lies before. They all share a chemical note. A retired teacher with the kind of spine that men think is sweet until they run into it. Margaret visited on Sundays with blueberry pie and short questions. "Are you sleeping? Is something wrong? Do you need help?" Ryan ducked all three. On a late morning in October, she arrived unannounced and found Elizabeth in the kitchen pretending to read a recipe card while her eyes swam. "Talk to me," Margaret said quietly, and Elizabeth broke in the gentle way strong women do, without theatrics, without noise, just a slow collapsing in the arms that will hold them. "He's somewhere else," Elizabeth whispered, "even when he's here." Margaret closed her eyes. Memory blinked awake. The past, when not addressed, becomes inheritance. "I will speak to him," she said. That evening, she cornered her son on the back porch where the rain had just ended, and the air smelled like clean regret. "You're not a boy," she said. "Choose the man you want to keep being." He tried denial. She leveled it with a look. "End it," Margaret said. "If you can't for your wife, do it for your son. If you can't for him, do it for whatever small part of yourself still prefers honesty." He promised. Again, promises without action become smoke alarms with dead batteries. Olivia didn't like promises that didn't involve her. She adjusted the stakes, the messages sharpened, a photo invisible to most eyes but obvious to the two involved, a video that suggested more than it showed. I'm not a secret. She wrote once, I'm a future. Weeks later, Charles called again. This time there was no velvet in his voice. I don't promote indecision, he said. The West Coast portfolio moves under your name if your life can carry the weight. Stability matters. Alignment matters. I don't build legacies on distractions. The terms were plain. Marry my daughter. Marry my empire. Ryan drove home with his heart pounding like it had outgrown his chest. He watched Noah sleeping, one arm thrown over his toy dinosaur, and understood suddenly how men become strangers to themselves, one compromise at a time. All of them dressed like pragmatism. He told Elizabeth they had grown apart. He cited hours and schedules, the usual scaffolds men build when they need to explain a collapse without confessing its cause. He used phrases like, we deserve to be happy, and this isn't working, and we've tried. He cried, because shame has tear ducts, too. Elizabeth listened, hands folded, wedding band cold. She didn't ask who. A smart woman never interrogates a lie she already knows. She nodded once, like a doctor hearing a diagnosis she can't treat. Noah stays with me, she said. He hesitated, shared. Her mouth tightened. We'll see. After he left the room, she stood very still and felt the air around her thin. Later, she went downstairs because the house was too full of memories that had not aged well. As she stepped onto the sidewalk, Michael, her neighbor across the hall, a landscape architect with quiet eyes, was locking his door. He saw the tremor in her mouth before she could speak. Walk, he asked. They walked. Rain made everything silver. When she told him, he didn't offer fury. He offered a sentence, almost a whisper, that landed like a hand on a bruise. Modern women put on powder, he said gently, not war. Elizabeth laughed a small, bewildered sound, and then she cried in a way that didn't ask for rescue. The divorce paperwork moved like a slow train that still manages to arrive too fast. Lawyers polished their knives. Ryan signed with a hand that shook. Elizabeth signed with a hand that did not. On the same afternoon, in a different room, Olivia and Charles signed an investment agreement that sounded like a wedding vow spoken in financial terms. Pens clicked. Paper whispered. Somewhere between the ink and the pressure, Ryan traded something no one could appraise. The illusion was over. The fall had acquired a calendar. The courtroom was wood and echo. It smelled like old polish and new fear. Elizabeth's lawyer presented the straightforward arithmetic of betrayal messages that bent toward intimacy, hotel invoices, the lipstick that didn't belong. She didn't look at Ryan while the exhibits passed by. She kept her eyes on the judge, on the clerk, on her own hands. She had learned, in medicine, to watch what matters. Ryan's attorney answered with precision honed over expensive hours. He suggested emotional instability, too many night shifts, moments of fatigue, a tendency to withdraw. He never said she was unfit. He said she was overwhelmed. He never said she was fragile. He asked if she had cried lately. The sexism wore a suit and called itself concern. Margaret sat behind her son, jaw clenched, aging by the minute. Noah waited in a quiet room with crayons and a counselor trained to make unbearable questions sound like games. When it was time to discuss custody, words stopped being words and became weapons. Elizabeth felt each sentence hit her ribs. She answered carefully, never letting anger dilute clarity. Ryan stared at the table, and in certain moments, his face looked like a boy who'd found a broken thing and didn't know how to admit he'd broken it. It should have been simple. It never is. During a recess, in the corridor where the light was too bright, Ryan reached toward Elizabeth without touching her. I never wanted, he began. She turned. You wanted everything, she said. That's different. Michael arrived on the second day. He didn't sit beside her in a way that invited commentary. He sat behind her like a guardrail. When the shouting started, because it always does, down the hall, in another case, in another family, he passed her a bottle of water she didn't know she needed. He didn't tell her she would win. He told her she would survive. The moment that broke, the room came quiet. Like most explosions, Noah was asked where he felt safest. The judge's voice was as soft as the question could be. Do you like being with Mom? Yes. Do you like being with Dad? Yes. If you had to pick where to sleep most nights, whose house would you choose? He hesitated. He looked toward the door, toward no one, toward the place where children search for the version of the world that won't hurt anyone. Then he said, Dad. Because boys sometimes pick the parent who seemed most likely to disappear. Elizabeth didn't make a sound. Her body learned how to shatter without drawing attention. Ryan closed his eyes. His lawyer touched his elbow, a gentle cue to stay composed. By the end of the week, the outcome was something that could be called a compromise by people who didn't live inside it. Shared custody, primary residence with Ryan for the school year, Elizabeth's apartment for weekends and summers, a schedule that looked neat on paper and bled in practice. Outside the courthouse, The sky nursed a storm. Elizabeth walked down the steps and sat on the last one because the ground felt too far away. Rain began as if the weather had been listening for its cue. Michael appeared with an umbrella. He didn't open it over both of them at once. He held it above her first, like reverence. "Come home," he said softly. "Home is away from me," she answered. "Then we'll build a closer one." Back in her apartment, the air smelled like absence. She boiled water without wanting tea. She put a blanket on the sofa and didn't sit. She moved through the rooms, touching objects the way one touches the walls after an earthquake to see what still stands. Then she slept for 12 hours and woke into a morning that felt like a rumor of hope. Grief reorganized her. She began to run again, early, when the city was blue and unoccupied. She cooked simple food. She laughed once at a sitcom and startled herself. On a Tuesday, she bought tulips and didn't explain it to anyone. Michael learned to knock once and wait. He brought soup and left it on the counter with a note that said, "Nothing poetic." He repaired a squeaky door. He texted pictures of parks and asked if she wanted a walk. He gave her space the way you set a table for someone you hope will sit. Their first real evening together had no announcement. He sautéed onions and garlic, and the apartment filled with ordinary salvation. They ate on the floor because the kitchen table felt too formal for the small miracle of breathing without pain. He told her about his sister, about the year his father left, and how silence ran the household like a king. She told him about patients who survive because they have a reason that isn't medical. It wasn't romance. It was relief. After a while, relief becomes love without asking permission. On the other side of town, a different kind of party was preparing itself. Ryan and Olivia were getting married. The venue was glass and gold. Strings played songs written to be forgotten after they made the photographs sound expensive. People whispered because people always do. She's gorgeous. She's dangerous. He's ambitious. He's ruined. Elizabeth didn't attend. Of course, Margaret did, out of duty and curiosity, and stood in the back like a warning no one would read. When Ryan kissed his bride, Margaret saw the way Olivia's eyes stayed open, watching the room. Love closes its eyes sometimes. Power never does. After the ceremony, Olivia found Ryan cradling Noah in a corner, both of them laughing at a private joke involving napkins and fake volcanoes. She saw how his face softened, how the boy's hand fit in his father's palm like a truth that wouldn't be negotiated. Later, in the car, her voice was a straight line. "You love him more than you love me." He didn't answer. Some accusations are maps. The trial was over. The loss had begun to choose its lessons. Revenge is loud. Karma is patient. The new marriage began with a calendar full of dinners and a silence full of debris. Olivia became pregnant within a season. The announcement pleased Charles, filled his weekends with plans. It did not fill Ryan. He smiled where smiling was required. He bought a crib. He installed it in a room that never felt like it was waiting for him. Olivia, fierce in other arenas, found pregnancy a foreign country. Her temper sharpened. She kept count of Ryan's hours, of his glances at his phone, of the times he said Noah's name without meaning to. She didn't want to be a stepmother. She wanted to be the center of a story that had too many characters who refused to die. One afternoon, she discovered a bank account she hadn't been invited to discover. The statements were careful and clean transfers toward a trust in Noah's name. Deposits labeled with a code only 2 people would understand. The money wasn't enormous, the meaning was. When Ryan returned home, she was waiting in the kitchen with a printed ledger. "You're funding your past," she said. "I'm supporting my son," he answered. "And his mother," she added. Silence testified. The argument didn't end so much as fall asleep on the couch and wake meaner in the morning. She began to turn her anger toward the only person she could win against a child who didn't know the rules of adult cruelty. She scolded Noah for shoes not lined up, for jokes repeated, for the gravity of being a reminder. Ryan intervened, then apologized to both of them, then slept on the edge of the bed like a man who knows which half of the mattress belongs to a mistake. The day the line almost broke was the day Olivia lost her balance in every sense. She had come from a doctor's appointment she didn't like, and a phone call with her father that made her feel like a pawn with jewelry. Noah spilled orange juice on a beige rug. She lifted her voice, then her hands, and then something in her rewound the tape. Her palms hovered over a 9-year-old's small shoulders and met the air instead. Noah's eyes were large and unbearably kind. "It's okay," he whispered, as if he were the adult. Olivia stepped back, horrified by the shadow of a person she had not consented to become. She left the room and wept in a bathroom with the water running so the house wouldn't hear. The child's mercy had bent the arc of the moment. Another day, driving Noah back from Elizabeth's apartment, jealousy drove faster than she did. The car became a confessional where every sentence was a weapon. "Your father lies," she said, knuckles white. "People who ruin lives should pay." Noah, who had learned that adults sometimes turned into weather, spoke into his seatbelt. "Can we go slower?" She pressed harder on the accelerator, on a street near the water. Her phone lit up with Ryan's name. She reached for it, fumbled, heard it crack against the console and tumble into a cruelty of silence. She kept driving, as if speed could win an argument. The ocean appeared a sudden mouth of gray. She braked hard, hearts hammering in 3 chests. The car slid toward the shoulder and stopped partly by calculation, mostly by mercy. They got out. Wind slapped their faces. The sea rehearsed its old monologue. Olivia walked toward the rocks as if pulled by a story that wanted a dramatic ending. Noah followed at a distance, small and terrified, until his courage made him a different size. "Please," he called. "Please, don't." She stood at the edge, and for a dangerous second, the scene composed itself tragic, photogenic, stupid. She turned, dizzy, one shoe slipping on a wet patch of stone. She went down in a sudden, ungraceful collapse, catching herself on her hands, then sliding, then grabbing at a jut of rock with the strength panic lens. Noah's face became the entire sky above her. He threw himself onto his belly, reached down, and caught a sleeve. He didn't have leverage, but he had urgency. And urgency sometimes breaks physics. "Hold on," he cried, voice ripped by wind. "Someone will see. Someone always sees." A siren became a rumor and then a presence. A ranger's flashlight cut the shoreline. 2 officers ran, assessing, commanding, lifting. The world reassembled around the pulsing lights of a patrol car and the pulsing hearts of a mother-to-be and a boy who had done something brave without knowing where he learned it. At the hospital, the obstetrician used words that were careful and frightening, threatened. Monitor. Stabilize. Olivia lay very still, holding stillness as if it were an instruction to her future. When Ryan arrived, breathless and colorless, Noah took his hand and placed it on Olivia's arm with a wisdom older than his age. "She needs you to be kind," he said. Then he went to find a vending machine, because little boys do practical things after saving lives. Olivia stared at the ceiling and saw a map of choices she had mistaken for inevitabilities. When the doctor said the baby was holding on, something inside her finally loosened. She slept, and in sleep, shame negotiated with mercy. The next morning, she asked for a pen and paper. Her handwriting looked like someone else's. The words were few and sufficient. "I want to separate. I will raise the child. Please don't fight me. Don't fight her." She showed it to Ryan without ceremony. He read it as if it were a prescription he had been given years late. "Okay," he said. And in that syllable was a lifetime of finally telling the truth. Charles visited his daughter with a bouquet that smelled like apologies and expectations. "We'll handle this," he said. "You'll be fine." "I know," she answered, not looking at him. "I'm going to be human first." She returned the ring. She returned the name she had borrowed for a few months. She kept the baby and a hard-earned understanding power without tenderness is just a different word for emptiness. As for Ryan, the collapse found him quickly. Deals stalled, boardrooms cooled, his reputation, once burnished with charm, acquired a patina of caution. He moved out of the house into a rental that echoed, and the echo kept him awake. He stopped eating well. He stopped calling anyone. He started driving too fast. One night, no one knows exactly how, a semi changed lanes without seeing him, and the lane ended at the physics of steel. The paramedics wrote the sentence that ends so many chapters dead at the scene. The funeral was modest and devastated. Margaret's grief was a clean, old thing, deep and not performative. Noah held his grandmother's hand and stared at the framed photograph of his father laughing at something that no longer mattered. Elizabeth stood at the edge of the room like a shoreline. Olivia came in simple black. She walked like someone learning to carry a new soul, carefully her own. After the service, Elizabeth approached with a small white envelope. "He asked me to give you this," she said. "He meant to. He didn't get to." Inside was a bank card, access to the account Olivia had raged about. A simple sentence on a note in Ryan's unmistakable handwriting. For the child, for the woman who will raise her, I am sorry in 1,000 ways. Olivia closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were less armored. "Thank you," she said. Elizabeth nodded and didn't offer a speech. Some kindness needs silence to fit. Time didn't apologize. It just moved, and the living moved with it. Months later, the world had softened around the edges of the disaster. Olivia gave birth to a girl with startlingly calm eyes. She named her Grace, not for anyone, simply for what she hoped to learn. She raised her in a modest apartment with light that made the mornings kind. She worked less for a while. She learned to cook exactly 2 dishes well and laughed about it with a friend from college who didn't ask for gossip. Charles visited sometimes and tried not to make offers that sounded like contracts. He held his granddaughter and found a tenderness he had outsourced to other people for too long. He did not say he was sorry. He mostly showed it. Noah grew taller. He learned to tie a tie on YouTube for a school recital and asked Elizabeth if he looked like a person ready to not be a child for 4 minutes. On weekends, they cooked together, and he burned pancakes in a way that became a tradition. He talked about his father in past tense without wincing. Grief had become part of the grammar. Michael didn't replace anyone. He built beside. He kept showing up with practical love rides to soccer, a new lock installed, a book left on the table with a note that said, This feels like us. He asked once if he could stay and listen to the yes as if it were a ceremony. When he and Elizabeth married, it was in a backyard dressed with string lights and tulips. Noah carrying a ring and trying not to trip over a sog that had invited itself to the reception. Margaret cried the way mothers do when they have survived enough to know joy is not a small thing. There were toasts, none performative, and vows, none theatrical. Elizabeth's dress was simple and lovely. Her eyes were steady. She had lost and not broken. She had loved again and not apologized. From a distance, at the edge of the yard, Olivia stood for a while with Grace sleeping against her shoulder. She didn't approach. She didn't need to. When Elizabeth saw her, their eyes met in the strange solidarity of women who have lived through a man's storm and refused to become weathered by it. Olivia half smiled and left before anyone could make her a character. Some redemptions prefer anonymity. That evening, when the guests were gone and the house smelled like flowers and new laughter, Elizabeth tucked Noah into bed and kissed his forehead the way she had when he was small enough to fit. In the crook of one arm, she walked onto the porch where Michael was washing wine glasses, because domesticity is sometimes the most interesting adventure. The night was clear, the kind of clear that makes the world seem honest. I used to think strength was a noise, she said, leaning against the railing, something you made to drown out the things that hurt you. And now, Michael asked, now I think it's a quiet that doesn't move for anyone else's chaos. He dried his hands and took hers. You taught me that, he said. I had to learn it first. She answered, inside. The clock ticked the gentle way forgiven time does. In Noah's room, a nightlight made a small moon on the wall. Somewhere across town, Olivia rocked her daughter and hummed a tune she didn't know she knew. Margaret fell asleep with an open book, peace finally choosing her back. Elizabeth stood in the doorway of the life she had not planned and whispered to no one in particular, to the version of herself that had once believed happiness was a glass ornament. We don't need to punish anyone to be free. We only need to stop punishing ourselves. If there is a moral, it is not complicated. Women do not win by becoming louder than pain. They win by becoming wiser than it. The world confuses spectacle for power. The heart never does. And if there is a benediction, it is this. Sometimes the storm teaches you how to stand. Sometimes you teach the storm how to be quiet. Not every ending is loud. Some are quiet, the kind that whisper wisdom instead of pain. If tonight's story touched something inside you, take a breath and stay with us. Subscribe to Calm Mind Journal, where we share real stories at night, stories that help you remember peace is not what life gives you, it's what you choose to keep.